Hey guys, so in this video, I'm going to talk about a couple of the big picture things that we need to all be on the same page about when it comes to approaching your IWA and really planning that outline. As a reminder, this semester, we're not actually going to write the paper. We're just going to do a pretty detailed outline, which will be coming at the end of this week. But we first need to focus on how we're going to plan for that outline and making sure that we have a good vision for where we're headed in our paper, that we have a good plan for everything, so that hopefully the outline will become a little bit more natural for you. So, the first thing that I want to touch on is developing and refining the research question. So, as a reminder, your research question has to be argumentative. That is a non negotiable. And one easy way to do this is to begin by thinking about a problem that needs to be solved and brainstorming possible solutions. Now, one way that we've talked about this with your TMP and that I still highly recommend is to look at what's already being done. We don't necessarily have to reinvent the wheel here. Just look at what's already being done and whether or not those are effective methods for fixing the problem or how you could improve upon that method. In addition, if I wrote something that your question wasn't particularly argumentative on your stimulus packet assignment, you may want to try to use language like could, should, or would in your question. And this could be like, how could we fix X, Y, or Z? Or what should we do in order for this to happen? Now, obviously, we needs to be more specific and we need to be very clear in our research question, but that language can just be really helpful in thinking about your topic as problem solution. So you may want to revisit your question and refine it a little bit to make sure that that is the best way that you could have written your question. And at minimum, with your research question, you should include the what, the who, the problem, and the solution. So, the what is going to be the topic that's being discussed. So, whether it's going to be legalizing marijuana or whether it's going to be like NIL in football, doesn't matter, but whatever that topic is needs to be clear in your research question. We need a who. Start to think about who is responsible for fixing your problem. Is that going to be a group of people? Is it a singular person? Is it going to be a group of countries? Is it going to be a leader of a specific country? It can be as big or small as you need it to be, but make sure that that who is listed somewhere in your question. We also need the problem and the solution. So we want to start to think about your research question as really a driving force for where we're headed with your paper. Obviously, in your first drafts, you have no idea what that's going to look like. And hopefully, after you work through some of the stuff that we're going to talk about today and over the next couple of days, you'll feel a little bit better doing that. But I want you to keep in mind that if your question currently doesn't include the what, the who, the problem, and the solution, you are going to want to refine your question a little bit to give yourself some more direction. So, here are some examples of things that you would want to include, put in the context of our sample paper that we're going to be working with for the rest of this week. So, the sample paper that we're going to look at had the research question of should the Federal Communications Commission, an organization with the power to regulate the communication of information and therefore potentially VR journalism, regulate VR content when used with journalism to document traumatic events? So, if we're looking at that question, now this question, let me pause and just say this really quickly. This question was not based on the same stimulus packet that we're working with. The stimulus packet for this specific research question in this paper was perception. And so, this person is looking at perception through traumatic events and through VR journalism specifically. So, we have the WHO, which is going to be the FCC or the Federal Communications Commission. They are the body that this person is asking whether or not they should be responsible for regulating and therefore overseeing and managing the what, which is going to be VR journalism here. The problem is that there's a rise in VR journalism that may cause viewers to experience traumatic events through journalistic documentation. And the solution would be that increased regulation. And so you can see that I've color coded the who, what, problem, solution in the research question so that you can see how those could be incorporated effectively for you. So next we want to talk about how you want to organize your paper and whether or not you should approach this thinking about lenses or perspectives. So should you think lenses and perspectives? Should you think lenses or perspectives? Or should you think in the terms of topics? So when it comes to lenses, these should help to narrow your research scope. So these should be things that you're thinking about when it comes to your research question, but these are not things that you need to break each body paragraph into a different lens. If it is possible for you to take your research topic and break it down into multiple lenses that a body paragraph could write about, or talk about, that you could write that paragraph about, excuse me, then that's going to mean that your question is really too broad. And so we want to make sure that we're approaching this and thinking about it in the context of our lenses are guiding us in narrowing our topic, but they should not be the deciding factors of how we're going to write our body paragraphs. Next, when we're thinking about perspectives, our perspective should help guide our research to a more well-rounded argument, because we should be thinking about our perspectives as agreeing with our argument and having counters to our argument. And we're going to talk about counters in just a couple of minutes, but that is something that you really want to keep in mind, that at least one of the perspectives that you include has to be a counter to the argument that you're making, because you want to show that there are different viewpoints, different beliefs about the best way to approach and fix the problem that you've identified. And then when we think about topics, this is going to offer you a little bit more flexibility, but you want to be careful to include multiple perspectives. So to think about it this way, lenses are not at all how you should break down your body paragraphs. When we're thinking about your body paragraphs, you want to do that by either perspectives or those subtopics that are going to still relate to your overall topic, but they're going to show a different piece of your topic. It's just a new claim, a new topic that could be a supporting point. But again, you're also going to have a counter that has to be included. So let's talk a little bit about developing counters and rebuttals. So we have two different ways that we can approach counters. So counters can be counter arguments, which are going to go directly against our argument. So if our argument is yes, we should increase taxes, the counter argument would be no, we should not increase taxes. Very simple. It goes directly against, like they are opposing one another. A counterclaim is going to question a specific aspect of your argument, but they may not disagree with the entirety of your argument. Maybe they disagree with your reasoning. Maybe they disagree with your approach to fix the problem, but they still agree that the problem needs to be fixed in a specific way. So a counterclaim might be, if we increase taxes, people are likely to move out of that area, and ultimately that would hurt the schools. Because if our argument is yes, we should increase taxes, they're saying, sure, we probably should. However, we need to make sure that we consider this fact before we jump down that rabbit hole completely. And then we want to have rebuttals. And a rebuttal is simply a rebuttal or a refutation to your counter. So it's a response to your counter. It's where you're taking the counter and flipping it back to your side. Now, we talked a good bit about counters and rebuttals when we looked at part A at the very beginning of the year, and you had to identify those counters and rebuttals. But here we really want to think about you choosing the strongest counters and the strongest rebuttals, so that you're going to make sure that you are showing that well-rounded argument. So again, let's say that my argument is that yes, we should increase taxes. Someone else says, yeah, we probably should, but we need to make sure that we consider people moving out of the area. And then the rebuttal that I could then give to this person would be that research shows that the community supports the increase in taxes for schools specifically. So it's unlikely that people will move away. Now, you'll notice that a lot of times when it comes with rebuttals and with counters, we still need to have evidence to support the reasoning. So here we would need to have some sort of evidence that suggested that when taxes increase in a community, people often move out. And then in the rebuttal, we would need specific evidence related to this community. And it would say that research, so what research shows us that people support? Maybe it's polling, maybe it's surveys done in the area, whatever it is, but it needs to support this idea. We're not trying to come up with hypotheticals. We're trying to actually use the evidence that is in front of us to support our reasoning. So some recommendations I have for you when you're thinking about your counters and rebuttals. First of all, I highly recommend that you include an entire paragraph dedicated to considering your counter argument and or your counterclaim. You may have one, you may have multiple, but it's ideal that you at least have one paragraph dedicated to that counter. And not only will this prove that your argument is well-rounded, but it also counts as that second perspective, which is going to be super important once we start to dig into the rubric a little bit. Part of the rubric is is highlighting that you can identify and include multiple perspectives, and that you can put those perspectives into conversation. And so to put those into conversation, when you have a counter and then you choose to refute that counter, you're directly putting those perspectives into conversation by weighing them, showing who's right or who's wrong, and showing the various ideas related to the topic. And it is important to note that you can choose to refute the counter in the body paragraph where you introduce the counter, or you can do it in a separate paragraph. But if you make sure that they're in different paragraphs, they need to be right next to each other. So the counter should directly follow, the rebuttal should directly follow the counter so that you can say, here's the counter and here's how I refute it. It's not making me wait 3 other supporting points to get to the rebuttal. Then your line of reasoning is a bit all over the place and it's not going to be an effective choice. So we've already worked through finding sources, but an important thing to remember is that your counters and rebuttals also are going to need sources. So if you don't have those things, make sure that you're looking at both popular and peer-reviewed sources that are going to be most effective in supporting those counters and rebuttals. Again, this is that media bias chart that we've looked at before as a reminder. This is going to be our value of reliability, and this is going to be our left versus right. So if something is going to fall toward the bottom and toward the left, that means that it's going to have a Democrat bias or a liberal bias, but it is going to also be unlikely to be true or have misleading information. Same thing if we look over on the right, that's going to have a more conservative or Republican bias, and then the ones that are going to be toward the top are going to be the most trustworthy, and then all the way toward the bottom are going to be the least trustworthy because they're going to be the least accurate. You'll notice that we want to kind of stay in this green box up here. This is where, especially with your popular sources, we should be pulling from the most, because this is really going to give us the most neutral bias sources, but also those that are the most accurate and reliable with what they're reporting on. Here's some links. I've added a couple of others that I recommend that you use. Those were linked on our the slides that were with your bibs that were kind of talking through some other places that you could look for your bib sources, especially for peer-reviewed sources. And make sure that you always filter by peer-reviewed or academic articles when you're looking at these different databases. The only database that will not let you actually filter is going to be Google Scholar. Everything else will let you filter so that you know if you check that box that says it's an academic or peer-reviewed source, that it's going to be peer-reviewed and not a popular article, because even though these databases are more credible, they still do have some popular sources in them, so we have to make sure that we're filtering. So now very quickly, let's talk about organization. So the organization of your paper is going to be very similar to what we did before. You're going to have the introduction, where in your introduction, you're going to have to go over the context, which is going to be our who, what, when, and where. You're also going to have to discuss the significance. Tell me why we care. And we're going to have to do this ideally through quantitative evidence. So that numerical data that's going to back up our reasoning is going to be extremely significant when it comes to the significance portion of your introduction. And then you're going to include your research question or your thesis. You will have the option here to do a research question or a thesis. So it's equally as important that we have a strong research question as we have a strong thesis, because you can choose which one is a best fit for your paper. Then moving into your body, we want to have those multiple perspectives, which is going to be your counter and your argument or supporting point paragraphs. And you're also going to want to make sure that you include that rebuttal to your counter. You're also going to want to have transitions. This one that says transitions with an underline is a link. So if you need that document, we've seen it before, but if you need easy access to it, it is there for you. And then finally, in your solution, you're going to have to introduce at least one solution with the implications, both positive and negative consequences, and the limitations, so boundaries to successful solution implementation. So when it comes to this, I want you to think back to really your TMP. This is going to be the most similar to what you did for your TMP. The only difference is that you really only have to have one solution, and that solution needs to be the best fit solution to the research question that you included. So just two more sections on this, and then I promise I'm going to stop talking and let you actually get to work. So for section 9, this is the sample paper. Now, in the actual assignment that you're going to be doing today, this sample paper is going to be referenced a lot. I do have screenshots on the slides, but if you have not looked at it yet, it will be very helpful for you to skim through it at least to get a good idea of what an IWA should look like ideally. And then finally, we have writing an argumentative thesis. Now, again, I'm not going to go through this in a ton of detail because y'all are perfectly capable of reading, and I have talked about this with you before. But when it comes to your argumentative thesis, it's important that you recognize that counter argument and your argument in that thesis. And there are two examples for you. So there is this first example, and then there is a second example with the topic research question and that template for you. So with that said, we'll go ahead and pause there for this video. Please let me know if you have any questions, and I will see you in the next one.